I'm Louise, better known as Lou. It's very odd when people call me Louise. Ali's constantly calling me Louise, and I'm like, oh, that's very formal. Um, Phil is here. Phil the farrier. Phil, do you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Phil. I've been a farrier for 25 years and I'm Lou's farrier.
Phil and I have been knowing each other for far too long. I knew Phil before he had kids. We've known each other a very, very, very long time. We were due to have a second farrier join, but sadly he can't make it this evening. So you just have myself and Phil, and I hope that is more than adequate, which should be absolutely fine. So this evening we are going to go through shoeing thoroughbreds or X-race horses, different methods of shoeing, different methods of managing their feet, different ways of managing them, and the concepts around working them and why we do what we do. And what we've got this evening is we've got quite a few case studies that Phil and I have kind of worked on collaboratively together throughout the years. Some are also just what Phil has done on his own as well. But it's kind of from our perspective, and it's not saying this is 100% it's not the only way. Like we're always kind of up for learning and doing things, but we're hoping this evening to give you a bit of an insight as to what we do, why we think the way we think, and how we adapt and we do things. Um, so I hope it makes sense. First of all, the biggest of thank yous to Agria. Agria are now supporting these webinars, and they are the reason that these webinars are now free. So please do scan the QR code here. It's at the beginning of this presentation and at the end of this presentation. Please go and have a look at what they can offer you and support with your ex-racehorse. They really are truly fantastic and they really support the ROR. So we are ever so thankful to them for being able to support these webinar series. It means a lot. It doesn't just have to be your horse. It can be your dog, your cat, or your rabbit. They are a really lovely, lovely, lovely company. So obviously you've signed up because you either have a thoroughbred or an ex-racehorse or both the same. But these guys are obviously built for speed. But the question is, like, what does that mean? Like, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know. These guys have been built to go fast. So whether it's over a short distance, a long distance, including jumping efforts or not. But what does that mean? Obviously, this evening with the focus on their feet. What exactly does that mean? So this horse here is Snowfall. She was a very good racehorse. She sadly died a few years ago. Very, very successful flat runner. But this is what our guys are bred to do, or with the hope that they will do. Moving at speed with the minimal amount of effort, being able to cover the most amount of ground possible, again, depending on the distance. Now, this is a horse at full flight gallop, and it's kind of we're going to play a bit, I guess, of spot the difference. But the main thing that when I was talking to Phil about how do we do this evening, it was always talking about how these guys place their feet, how these guys are managed. So being really aware that what these horses do in the gallop phase, particularly because obviously that's what they're bred for, that's what they're purchased for, and the forces that kind of act on these horses as to why they move the way they move, the way they act for what they do, and the way their bodies have been put together. So it's really key to notice in the gallop phase with these guys is that the flow of energy. So kind of the energy from the hind leg comes under to kind of propel them forward. But the energy doesn't, if you're talking about it in terms of they're not naturally uphill, the energy is to propel forward and across the ground. You don't want a racehorse that spends a lot of time in the air because it's really ineffective. You want the horse to cover the ground, to not be airbound and not have cadence. So this is the kind of the stride that we're looking at. So when we put a racehorse conformationally side on versus like a warm blood, for example, so when we're retraining them, the horse here on the left is a warm blood. He is a very well-known dressage horse. He's very successful as a young horse and now as an older horse up the levels. The horse on the right is an ex-race horse, and we can kind of play spot the difference between the two. But the horse on the left is built what you call uphill. So the croup is lower than that of the wither. The neck comes up and out of the wither. The forelimb is built kind of down directly out of their shoulder. The hind limb is bent, is kind of built to be able to sit and push and come under the body. Compared to the horse on the right, you can see that the horse on the right, who was quite a good racehorse, he ran on the flat, he was predominantly over the mile. He is croup high, so his bottom is higher than that of his wither. His shoulder is quite big compared to, like, you can see his shoulders like quite massive and rounded. His neck is set slightly below his wither, and the amount of space available between his back legs and his front legs, because both of these horses are stood in a similar position, is far less than the warm blood on the left. So these are the kind of physical attributes that we are working with. And when you've then got the kind of forces or how these horses move and how they balance themselves, it then kind of sheds light on how they place their feet and how they balance, which is a whole horse effect. So because the thoroughbred is naturally a little bit downhill and the forelimb is built slightly behind the vertical, which is to help them when they go into the gallop phase, they have to use their neck to balance. So that's when we kind of either have the image in our head of former racehorses having their neck up high in the air, or we have them a little bit long and kind of almost beyond the vertical, so quite long in the neck. They need their neck to balance. Their back is quite weak. It's not built to be in a carrying capacity for a rider. It's not saying that they can't, it's just a case of building up over time and how that then affects their body. So where their back is in the gallop phase, their back drops down. So if you've ever ridden a racehorse at full flight gallop, you'll have a moment when you're cantering along and the horse drops to the floor. Almost feels like it drops like a foot because they drop down in their body, they sink, and then they extend out. So this can then lead to, when we're looking at a riding horse, weak back muscles, poor posture, and you can kind of see again the same kind of force of effects. So the hind leg will naturally go up and over and come down into their shoulder and therefore like rotate down. And that's sometimes why under saddle they feel a bit on the forehand, which again will contribute to why their feet might be less than desirable. It's not saying that they can't be uphill. It's not saying that they can't push and they can't do. It's just a matter, it's time and it's training. But it's going through those stages of time and training as to what it affects the whole horse, and their feet are obviously a big concern because the classic saying no foot no horse. So again, both of these horses here are both croup high. The horse here on the and stood up on the right, you can see that his neck almost runs into his chest, so he has no almost no difference of space between his shoulders and his chest and then into the base of his neck. Again, his forelimb is built slightly behind the vertical. He is croup high and his neck is set below his wither. So then again, compared to the horse in the gallop phase, when this horse is walking, for example, he's warming up for his first Prix Saint George test, you can see how much that forelimb comes back under their body, how there is no space available for the hind limb to come through, to step through. So this idea and notion of a horse sitting and stepping and pushing and being uphill, um, it's quite difficult for these horses. So we're kind of maybe working a little bit against what their body naturally tells them to do, and their body will try and kind of put them back in that natural state where they need to use their neck to balance and slightly lift up and pull down. And so therefore, when we're retraining racehorses, we see two particular areas of main weakness or strength or issues, maybe from your physio, from your saddle fitter, from the way you feel when riding. And that is predominantly through the base of their neck and the bit behind the back of the saddle. So again, it's just what their body tells them to do, to drop down and pull away in their back, to use their neck to balance and hold through the base of their neck. You can see it a little bit more clearly with this image here. Again, this horse is an ex-racehorse. Weak behind where the number two is, you've got the horse that's weak behind where the saddle will sit. The croup is higher than that of the wither. Forelimb position behind the vertical. And again, that slightly elongated neck. You might have that extra muscle on the underside of their neck. You also have with the horses, they predominantly run in one direction, or they prefer a canter lead. Most former race horses prefer a left canter lead over a right canter lead. And that again results in like a bigger shoulder on one side, a maybe bigger second thigh muscle behind. So you might see predominantly a weakness in a right hind limb. And again, all of this acts on the horses. So even when they're cantering and they're going and they're doing, this is them in their kind of natural state, as it were, is that they're every day they canter out with their mates, with the rider above them, rather than a rider sitting on them, asking them to be round, asking them to be softened, asking them to work through their body. It's completely different when we're transforming these horses. And I think the main thing I hope that will come out this evening is that it's about time and it's about the transformation of these horses. So it's nothing's a quick fix. But it's a whole team effort. Obviously, this evening's focused primarily on the feet. But it is a whole team effort the whole way through. So load. the word loading, why is it a key factor of importance with these horses? Phil, do you want to talk about, because Phil does the full, what I call the full circle of thoroughbreds. He even does them as babies and yearlings. He does thoroughbred studs. I don't know if you want to talk about how they start off a bit in terms of loading their feet.
Yeah, so when they're first they're born, and then obviously they get up quite quick. When they're small, when they're foals, they've got quite an upright foot, which is a bit weird because you try and keep the heels down rather than letting them underrun. It's called, where they fold forwards, and then they just the foot elongates and then moves forwards, and then that puts a lot of strain on the back of the leg. So it's just keeping quite an upright foot, and then once they get to about the yearling stage, then you can see the foot developing more of what you'd imagine a thoroughbred foot to be like. You start to lose heel, the foot starts to drop back on itself slightly, but it's all to do with the effects of loading. So, like Louise explained, on the forelimb, they stand quite far under themselves. So they haven't got a perfect amount of loading on the foot. So they're going to strain it back slightly. Also, thoroughbreds have quite a long pastern, and I think that's left out quite a lot of the time. So the pastern's quite long, which means that you're going to end up with quite a long foot as well. And again, so as that toe's sort of longer in the front, it's going to put more weight towards the back of the foot, and it's going to crush those heels out. But during sort of up to yearlings and sort of going into training, once they start training, like Lou said, they tend to fitting them up by going around the gallops and stuff. But once they start that training to go on track, they're running predominantly anti-clockwise. So, and then that's when you see the forces on the left fore compared to the right fore, because it's on the right fore is on the outside, left fore is on the inside. So therefore, there's more force going through that left foot than there is going through the right foot. And I never knew this until Lou pointed it out to me, is the fact that after time, that left fore starts to become flatter because it's just taking more force. So the right fore then sort of doesn't become more upright, but it just holds itself better. So that's why predominantly thoroughbreds have sort of slightly one flat foot and one upright foot, basically. So they're not symmetrical, and that's why, because of the training and the way they go through sort of all the training, running always to one side. But it's sort of rule of thumb. It might be that way, but sometimes you see it the other way around.
I think it's also really important with these guys is that if they've done yearling prep, they've done 2-year-old sales, they've done breeze ups, every horse is led on the left. They go around the parade ring like the person always leads on the left. We get on the left. We mainly saddle up from the left. So everything with these horses is done on the left, which again can lead them into slightly being in left flexion as well, a lot, which can again cause problems through their front feet of how they place their feet and the balance of their muscular structure. It all affects to how they load their feet because their feet's the last point, isn't it? Really, it's like it's the end of the horse. Does that make sense? Like it's the final bit, isn't it? That's the last bit for them. So yeah, it's when these guys are ridden. I've also realised now, so this horse here is in actually right canter lead, which we're talking about going left. This horse actually in right canter lead, but we won't, one of those things. But again, these guys, even in work riding, these are Amy Murphy's horses. She takes them to the beach when she was based in the UK. Again, the rider is up and out the saddle. They're not sat on their back. They're not kind of working in an outline. They're kind of left to their own natural devices within reason. But I think it's really important to understand how these horses have been ridden and trained to understand why. And like Phil said, with the long pasterns and the pastern, if anyone's unsure which bit that is, it's between the fetlock and the foot. So like that's what it is. So it's always a little bit long, which gives everything a little bit of a longer appearance. Okay, so Phil, do you want to take this of why do we associate thoroughbreds with long toes and low heels? It seems to be the thing, or the phrase of all thoroughbreds have bad feet. Like I want a thoroughbred with good feet. So why do why do they have this appearance to start with?
I think the thing is, it's a lack of heel. I don't necessarily think every thoroughbred has long toes. It's more a case of a lack of heel. But again, it's all to do with the pressures. So, and not, I think a lot of people think it's down to the way they're shod early and the way that they're worked too early with shoes on, but I don't think it is. I think it's just purely in the breeding. So because of their stance, they're going to crush the heel out, and then the heel goes down. And then you end up with what you think is a long toe, but the toe itself might be completely parallel to the pedal bone. Therefore, it's not a long toe; it's low heels. So I think a lot of people get stuck on the my horse has a long toe, but sometimes the toe isn't long. It's just the heels are down. Unless you start to get a deformity in the picture we have here, you can see along the hoof wall that it looks a bit like a ski slope. So you've got the top half of the foot is in one direction, and then the bottom half of that sort of dorsal wall is in another. So that tells me that there possibly is a long toe and weak heels.
Do you feel like, I know you don't want to talk for every farrier, but do you feel that some farriers maybe lack confidence in being able to work with these horses sometimes because of the fear of making them lame?
Yeah, I think it's yeah, I think it's like everything in life. I think the more practice you have, the better you get, the more confident you become. So the less of something that you do, the less confidence you have in it. Um, and I wouldn't say that they're fearful, but thoroughbreds, uh, they're not the easiest to shoe. So I have a few friends that won't shoe thoroughbreds at all, but then I won't shoe Clydesdales. So it's one of those. But I feel like it's a learning curve, and it takes a long time to figure out a thoroughbred's foot and understanding why it grows the way it does, especially when you've got the internet, you've got Facebook with people telling you how it should be done, and trying to ignore a lot of the information, but also take in a lot of information, because it's always good to hear from other people's point of view on how they cope with the exact same thing you're coping with. So we all use modern materials now, but we all use modern materials that suit us. So I use pads and dent impression, but some farriers won't use that, and they'll use silicon based pads and stuff like that. But I know tend to stick with what you know.
Yeah. I think so. This next bit is also, it's, I think sometimes we misunderstand. It's very easy to get obsessed with the foot, but I think it's the factors that affect the foot balance and the foot quality that it's very easy to point the finger at, like, well, my horse just keeps losing shoes, therefore the farrier's not doing this, or my horse is just prone to losing shoes. But the multitude of factors that affect hoof quality, as just listed some here, is your movement of your horse, your saddle fit, gut health, diet and either lack of or not enough nutrients, position of rider, level of training of horse, surface that the horse is ridden on, the posture and the balance of the horse, asymmetries, and kissing spine. That's quite a long list, and that's not all of them. To kind of think
Yeah,
about every single one of these factors can be an issue, like can.
I think one thing to point out as well is the dietary nutrition. Sometimes they're not lacking in them, sometimes they're overdosing in them. So everybody's trying to give them as much farrier's formula, and then they're giving them seaweed, and they're just pumping them full of nutrients that the body can't handle. So that it's just flushing it through. So you're just basically feeding your horse money. And the body doesn't really know what to do with all those extra nutrients you're giving it. So it just flushes it back out the other end. And then, therefore, when you're trying to give them these nutrients and you overdose them, I don't feel the right ones are getting in. So it's a case of just finding out what your horse needs and then sticking to them.
And I must say, like, I never used to feed a balancer because I just thought there's no way like a cup of something for a 500 upward kilo horse can make a massive difference. But I kind of got converted to balancer a couple of years ago now, and I don't Phil, I it was only when I pointed it out, Phil said, you do realize you've lost less shoes since the horse has been on a balancer. And I was like, oh yeah. And we'd had a bad winter that year as well. And it does come down to, if your horse has got good gut health, their foot quality is better because everything's healthier, I guess. I think you'd agree, wouldn't you?
Yeah, yeah, and I think the number one thing I'm always asked is what supplement I'd give them, so farrier's formula or just anything like that. And it's normally you have to look at the whole range of supplements. You have to make sure you're giving them the right things in the first place. But you can't just put a bit of Kevin Bacon on and hope to God that the foot's going to repair itself. You need to look at the full diet.
Yeah. And you're also very good actually. Sometimes you've also picked up on like is your saddle fitting right? Because when you've picked certain horses' feet up, you're like, this just doesn't feel quite right. Like the horse feels a bit weird. Or like, if some horses like have their joints medicated. I remember you've picked up some horses' legs and being like, this hind leg's getting worse or something, and you actually call it before. Because again, if they're struggling, if they're possibly either in pain or struggling somewhere, they're going to compensate somewhere else, which again is going to affect how they land their feet.
Yeah, so what I see a lot is horses with hock issues, and they need a bit of just a little bit of um steroid just every 6 months, just to give them a helping out. What you tend to find is when they're coming to the end of that, once when you come to the end of that 6 months, when you're nailing on the hind shoes and the concussion's going up through the limb, then they start to flinch when you're putting the shoes on, nailing them on, but also pulling hind shoes off. When once a horse starts pulling hind shoes off, I didn't realise is when horses have hock pain, they tend to try and stand with it in towards the centre, so they try and stand both front hind feet in the same place. So then they start standing on themselves and pulling off shoes, and you start to get a really upright inside wall, which I didn't. I only learnt that possibly about a year ago. So I always thought horses were just getting lazy as they were getting older.
But, yeah. So X-rays, how or why do X-rays help? And when would you suggest getting X-rays? Are X-rays a necessary thing? Do X-rays cause us to slightly over panic? What are your thoughts on X-rays?
I think X-rays are great. So even if one of my customers has an X-ray for uh, an issue that has nothing to do with me, I always ask for the X-rays on any horse I shoot, just because an X-ray tells you so much, and you're not necessarily always doing it to look for problems. Um, the as long as the horse is sound, and it's going well, then you don't need to be looking for problems to try and fix. But it's always good just to have that vision of what's happening inside the hoof, because obviously you can't see it as a barrier. You can only see what's happening on the outside of the hoof. So sometimes you can dress a foot and you think you've got the perfect balance, and then they have an X-ray and it's not, and it just, especially on pigeon-toed horses, they're really bad. And Lou knows herself. My pony came in lame one day, and I was convinced I had a foot abscess, so we pulsed it for a week, and then nothing happened. So I got an X-ray from the vet, and it turned out it had rotation in one front foot, which just blew my mind. I was shocked. But with the thoroughbreds, I do tend to try. I like it to have an X-ray to start with, so I know where the base point is. And if we're going to work forwards, you can't correct everything, but at least you know where you need to be placing the shoe, adjusting the balance if you can. It's all those little things. It's just an aid, really.
Yeah. Do you think I don't know whether I'm speaking out of turn, but I do feel like depth of soul with thoroughbreds, people really underestimate their lack of depth of soul, which then causes real grief, I think. I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn.
Yeah, yeah, the depth of soul, especially at the moment with all this unbelievable wet weather, we get a thing called washed out, which is where the mud sticks to the sole, and then the mud will rip out the exfoliating sole. And the exfoliating sole is there to protect the the new sole underneath. So the mud rips it all out, so the sole gets thinner and thinner to the point where it can be as thin as sort of a couple of millimeters, and you can manipulate it with your fingers. And once you get to that stage, then the horse is going to be very uncomfortable just walking around, even on the grass or in the soft. It's still going to be very uncomfortable. So depth of sole is really important. And again, you can't see that without an X-ray. You can only judge from pushing on the sole. And sometimes, if it's been quite dry, the sole can seem quite hard, but actually be quite thin. But when it's wet like it is now, you can tell really quickly if it's a thin sole.
So when we're looking at X-rays, people are always talking, or vets start talking about lines and angles and this, that, and the other. And we're not vets, we're not built here to read X-rays, but at the same time, just so people are aware, like what is your hoof pastern axis, negative rotation, because I think they are the two things that are associated with thoroughbreds. I think if I'm again I don't want to be putting words into your mouth. And like, what are the effects of them? Because I think we see mainly negative rotation in the hind feet predominantly. And I think the hoof pastern axis and all the lines that we see when people start drawing on x-rays. Talk to me about it.
So yeah, so the X-rays are great, especially when they put lines on it. But my one pet hate is when they start putting numbers on it, because then people start chasing numbers. So they'll put a degree of rotation, and then they're constantly chasing the number. So the hoof pass and access would be your long horizontal red line going from the top to the bottom, and you can see there it should be a perfect straight line, but you can see how the bone column there is bowing in, so it's coming away from the line. It should be quite parallel to the line. It will never be perfect, but it should be as parallel to that line as possible. And that's due to the fact that this foot has reverse rotation, which is where the back of the pedal bone is parallel to the floor. So if you look at the pedal bone, which is the bone at the bottom, and the red line running along the top of the shoe, you can see that pedal bone is nearly in a perfect parallel with that line. And it shouldn't be. You should have about a 5-degree rotation. So the back of that pedal bone should be up possibly 3 or 4 millimeters at least compared to the front. So, and then once you get that reverse rotation, that's when you start to get strain on the deep digital flexor tendon, which would be like yourselves wearing a pair of clown shoes and trying to walk around. You know, it puts all the strain up the back of the leg. And then with the hoof pass and access, once you start to, the foot starts to elongate and starts to move forwards, then you're starting to put strain on the flexor tendons. You're going to put strain on the suspensory ligament. And all of those tiny tendons and ligaments have so many other structures connected to them. So if you put strain on the deep digital flexor tendon, which travels all the way to underneath the foot, it goes and it uses the navicular bone as a fulcrum point, which is a point in which something can change direction. So if you've got extra strain on that deep digital flexor tendon, that's then pushing against the navicular bursa, which is placed against the navicular bone. So you are basically squeezing the navicular bursa, squeezing that navicular bone, and then you'll get heel pain or come up as heel pain. So it's just all those structures. There's so many structures that work together in a horse that if one's affected, all the structures around it are going to be affected. So it is vital, you know, when you have an issue, to have an x-ray so you can see, because you can, in your mind's eye, you can make up where all these structures are and work out where they're going. So this is the ideal.
Not that. We're going to there.
So you see lots of pretty green lines. So
they're like happy
yeah,
lines. It's happy, it's in green.
They are very happy lines. So I hope everybody can see. So your pastern, so your hoof pastern axis. So all 3 of those bones all nearly line up. They will never, as I said, they'd never line up. You'd never get them in a perfect straight line, but getting them as straight as possible. And then the back of the pedal bone at the bottom, the back of the pedal bone is higher than the front of the pedal bone, which again, so that's where you've got your deep digital flexor tendon going down. It's all going around that navicular bone, which is a little bone just on the edge of the green circle. That's where the deep digital flexor tendon crosses over. And Lou goes back to the other x-ray and we look at the same thing on the other one. You can see the amount of pressure that's being put on that navicular bone must be immense, because that tendon will stretch, but it won't stretch a long way. It's like an elastic band, so it will stretch, but the idea is that it pulls the foot up and gives you flexion. When it's already taut, it's going to be much harder for the horse to pull that tendon up.
And if you think that's just with them on their own, that's without the additional weight of saddle, tack, and rider, and then being asked to work on a surface, work on a turn and a bend. Like if you then stack everything else on top, you can see where either behavioral or soundness issues or both come into play. Like, and it's very easy to then blame someone, something along the way, when actually, like you said, it's forces, isn't it? And it's that loading of the
Yeah.
foot.
And again, if Lou goes, so this x-ray here, you can see what I mean about numbers. So the vet here has put the degree angles on it. He's put the sole depth on it, which is great because this made me look like a hero because everything's pretty perfect. But if it wasn't, then I'd have a customer chasing those numbers the whole time. And it's very hard to tell somebody that the numbers aren't. As you can see, this is a pair of front feet off the same horse, and those numbers don't match up. But that horse is sound, it's working well, the feet look good, and there's nothing for me to change with the way it's being shod, but the numbers don't match up. So trying to explain to somebody that you cannot, when they do this Palmer angle of 5.95 degrees, that 0.95 degrees is so small because it's only 0.9 of a degree. So, and then again on the other side, so on the 4.57 degree, which sounds like it's different, but you'd struggle to see a difference with an eye. It's only because they have very clever computer technology now that can measure it all, and it can work it all out. But like I say, with the sole depth as well here, so we've got 1.3 centimeters on one foot and 1.1 centimeters on the other. And I've shod that horse for many years, and I couldn't tell you how thick the soles were. All I know is he's got strong soles.
Compared to zero?
Yeah, zero. So also, going back to this reverse rotation, so as the pedal bone drops, I have my handy little hoof here. I'm going to show you all. So underneath the pedal bone, if you can see that, so this piece here is called the digital cushion. So that is part of the frog. So everybody goes on about blood supply and how the frog helps push blood. Well, this digital cushion's a huge aid in that. And if you imagine that pedal bone's rotated down, it's squashed this digital cushion into nothing. That frog and the back of that foot is going to try and it's got to go somewhere. So it's going to fall down. Once that falls down, it's going to take all the weight off the heel, and then the heel's going to collapse more. So you're going to just keep going that way. And that's the problem. You know, so all these structures, that's what I mean by all the structures, they're all affected. Once something happens, all the structures around it start to get affected.
Just one thing. So let's start at the beginning of concerns we may see in early stages of retraining. So these guys are coming from a higher starch diet, so crumbly feet, so feet that don't seem to hold shoes. They've been in canter and fast work 4 or 5 days a week. The horse is still physically developing, so if they've come out of racing when they're a little bit younger, they have less turnout. So obviously each trainer is different position in the UK of where they're based. It's all very different of access to turnout. Some have more, some have less, some have none. Dependent. Experiencing working on different surfaces throughout the year, that is something maybe new to them, or working at different points. So if you've got a flat horse, they may not be in work during the winter as much. If you've got a jumps horse, they may not have ridden in the summer as much. That does play a big part into it. These horses have also had big periods of letdown if they've done multiple seasons. They've been ridden in a race saddle, and the amount of padding on a race saddle, it's padded up, but it's not fitted to them, which again will affect their muscular structure and how they hold themselves and how they move and how they load their feet. When we then start retraining them, their workload is very different. They are going from cantering 4 or 5 days a week to learning how to use themselves in a different way, carry a rider in a different way, different tack. When they are in racing, they are shod differently. So they aren't just always in aluminium plates, but they change up between stainless steels and alley plates depending on how and where they're running, which affects their shoeing cycle. Shoe loss happens more, I think, in retraining than in training. And things like they are shod in the stable in racing, they aren't tied up. So small little things like that will then contribute to why you might have more concerns in the earlier stages of when you get them out of training or into retraining, because it just seems a bit more difficult, or the perception is. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Phil.
No, it's perfect. I think that's exactly the way it is, really.
Yeah. And the main thing I think Phil would agree is that when we're developing these horses post racing, it mainly comes down to their development of their posture and the horses being comfortable at every stage in every part of their body to what we can do. The difference between this horse is 6 months. The bottom image is when we first got him, and 6 months later is the top image. And the way this horse looks and holds himself, completely different. He's so much stronger over the back. Classic thoroughbred. He is in overreach boots because he was a chronic shoe puller, but he had a reason for his shoe pulling. Um, and again, in the early stages, they go a little bit like this, which is a little bit less than desirable, a little bit less than pretty. They look a little less symmetrical the whole way through their body. And then up top, when we're riding them, it's really, really hard because their version of a contact is very different to our version of a contact. But even with moments of like when they're twisting their head and twisting their neck, it's because they're struggling with their balance and they're working on a circle or a turn, or even if you're hacking, they're hacking in a different way to going up the gallops and working with their mates. So that is all going to affect how they're placing their feet, which again is going to affect the foot quality. I showed Phil this image earlier and he quite liked it. But I was saying like it's quite easy in the early days when we make them a little bit rounder or softer, or we're trying to build up their posture, is to actually make them a little bit almost too low in front for where their balance wants to be. And that again can cause excess loading of the front feet. These guys are built croup high, so they're always going to have that slight downhill tendency without us then adding too much in front by making them too round or stretched too far out and round when they're not strong enough through their posture and their back. And the best way I can describe it is like if you push a wheelbarrow too fast, you end up tipping forward and almost upending it a little bit. So how we train these horses in the early stages is really key to how we keep that foot quality as good as we can, because we can accidentally add to it without meaning to, which I don't think I'm unfair in saying. Please, someone yell at me if I am. And again, it comes down to, we're going to just look at a couple of horses, is their backs. Their backs are a big struggle. Their backs are a weakness of theirs. Like I said, they're not built for the rider to naturally sit on them and for them to push and be uphill and carry. Most horses, most ex-race horses in the beginning stages live in the bottom state, which is the hollow back, which is where again we talk about possible kissing spine or close processes, and the amount of range of movement for the horse to be able to and feel comfortable to go from a hollow back to a neutral back is vast. But again, it's how they then load their feet whilst they're doing that and how we train them, which can then add to it. So we're going to go into quite a few case studies that Phil and I have kind of been part of together. Please excuse me, he did roll in the gateway. I promise a bit under his girth is clean, but he did roll in the gateway when we were trying to take this video. So Phil actually got me in contact with Sonny. Phil, I don't know if you want to talk about Sonny because you were the reason Sonny turned up.
Yeah, so one of my lovely customers bought Sonny, um, and Sonny arrived and he came with pads on, and he was well shod when he arrived. He came with pads on. I think he lost a shoe within 10 minutes of getting there, and unfortunately I wasn't around, so another farrier came out to knock a shoe back on, and he said, "Oh, it doesn't need pads." So she took the pads off, and I could not keep shoes on it for love nor money. I just nearly had it hunter shod. It was footsore. I told her, there's a reason it might have had pads on, and it was very uncomfortable in its feet. Didn't have any hind shoes on. She was reluctant to put hind shoes on. And yeah, it was just a nightmare all round. And then I discovered that she had behavior issues with it. So then I thought, oh, and then she said that she'd taken him to the vets and had his back x-rayed, and it wasn't good news. And that's a point in which I said to her, well, I think she was going along one line, and I said, oh, maybe you should give my friend Lou a call and we'll see if she can fix it. And then, yeah, then Sonny ended up at our yard, well, at Lou's yard, and everything sort of got better from there on for me.
So Sonny, as you can see under saddle, can't move forward. He twists the saddle left and right, um, and his back is the contributor. But the main thing with Sonny is that his kissing spine was most prevalent where his wither started. So there was a reason why he was twisting his neck. He was holding himself in a certain way. He couldn't actually move. He couldn't get off like basically circle. He couldn't move forward. But his kissing spine was predominantly wither to the first few processes. So we medicated him. He wasn't a surgical candidate for a multitude of reasons, and this was him 3.5 weeks later, able to move forward, able to travel, able to drop his neck, able to get off an 8 meter circle. And that was because he was comfortable. And we also medicated his hocks as well. And we changed the saddle because the tree wasn't right. So it was the back was the primary cause, but it was also Sonny being comfortable throughout his whole body. And then Sonny stopped losing front shoes, much to Phil's happiness.
Yeah, he did, and it's true. It's obviously a sign that he was very uncomfortable, but I'd say nearly immediately stopped losing shoes, which is funny because our turnout's a lot bigger than Sonny's turnout at home. And obviously, Sonny's used to being friends with a little pony, not with 10 other thoroughbreds. So I was expecting to lose more shoes. And the fact that I go to the yard at least 3 times a week, I thought, oh, it's going to be a nightmare. But no, once a back issue, well, it's never sorted, but once he became more comfortable, he stopped losing shoes. So it's pointing out that shoe loss can be a sign of something different. You think it's just bad shoeing or, your farrier's not doing the right job. There might be something underlying that's causing the shoe pulling.
So another horse that we then had in was Dicky, and Dicky came from John O'Groats, Scotland, like north Scotland. And this was a case of struggling with lack of home team, lack of support. His owner is so lovely, and she does everything right by this horse. And she got to the stage where, because they're so far north in Scotland, they don't have regular people coming up like vets. If a horse loses a shoe, you've got to wait like 3 weeks for the farrier to be back in the area type thing. So Dicky came down. Now Dicky, again, he came with x-rays of he has kissing spine, but the vet didn't think the kissing spine was the problem, which does concern me upon these x-rays, but that's a whole other issue. But the primary cause that the vet was concerned with were Dicky's feet. And Dicky's feet on the left hand side were, I mean, scary to say the least. He had cracks from the bottom all the way to the top, and he had glue on his left foot. I've never heard Phil take a shoe off and go, "Oh," as he took a shoe off. I don't know if you want to explain about. I've got on there Dickie's back feet, his back left foot as well. I don't know if you and what. I'll let Phil explain a bit more about his feet and what he did, but what the result was because his back was Dickie's back was had kissing spine on multitude of things. Um, he had also rotated through the left hand side of his body, so the whole of his body had collapsed left. So it was working with my physio as well, which had then put strain on the left hand side of his body, which had then caused these cracks. So the vet was most concerned about his cracks. That's why he was struggling to move forward and be happy. But it was because of his back and having compensated for his back that caused him to rotate over completely onto his left hand side that has caused his feet to, when I say fall apart, I mean chronically fall apart. Phil, I don't know if you want to talk about Dickie.
So Dickie arrived with glue. No, he arrived minus one shoe, but he arrived with this big snot of glue on his toe. And the reason I went, oh, it's because when I picked the foot up, the big bit of glue just fell straight off. So as you can see there from the green circle, that is all the glue was doing, was holding that tiny little bit in place. The rest of it had already come loose. So I don't know how long it was like that. The crack itself was very deep in the front. So this is the front foot. So it's very deep in the front. The toes were slightly long. They weren't too long. It's quite, it wasn't a, it was a well-shod horse that arrived with lots of issues. And then the hind foot again, obviously from the keyholes, that's what we call these holes that somebody's put in the side of that foot. You look at that and there's been glue on there at some point. Again, sometimes putting glue on a crack just masks the crack more than helping fix it. You have to sort of look at the whole horse. And that's what we did as a team. We all looked at the horse. We looked at his weaknesses. So we knew straight away that the feet weren't really the issue. The issue was further up. So he was compensating with his feet. So these pictures go in order of bottom left was, I think that was the day he arrived without his shoe. And then the one above that is the day he arrived, and I shot him, and that was the best I could do. Sort of just try and pull. I'm not pulling that toe back at all. I've just set the shoe underneath, and I've tried to take as much pressure off the crack as I can. And all I've done is just put a normal everyday shoe on. I think he had heart bars on behind. Also, it's just trying to fix an issue which was further up that was just being shown through the feet. So we just shot him up, normal set of shoes, quarter clips on the hinds, side clips on the front. And then we go on to the next pictures. So the pictures down the center, again, that's the other hind foot without the crack. And then above it is straight after I shot it. Then the next one, that's a right front foot the day he arrived, and then we shot him. And then the right hand picture is Sonny's hind foot with that huge crack that he arrived with. I think that was 2 shoeings later. And as you can see, because everything else was fixed, there wasn't much, didn't have to rebalance the feet or anything. We just shot him up, bit of length, bit of width, made him comfortable. And that crack just started to fix itself because he was moving more evenly behind, and he was using both hind limbs rather than sort of like just throwing himself down on the left hand side. And then again, the toe on the front foot, I did heal well, but then I think just before he left, it split again. So we ended up, I don't think we have pictures, but we ended up putting a plate on it because the front crack had gone up into his coronet, and then once the coronet's been damaged, it's very hard to fix them. So we thought out of just balancing the foot we'd be able to do it, but unfortunately not. Then we just added a plate, and then I think Vicky had that plate on for a couple of shoeings before he went back, and it had already started to knit together at the top. So but this is just showing that the vet thought it was the feet. He thought all the issues were coming from the feet, and it wasn't at all. The horse was quite sound in his feet. It was purely coming from higher up, and the feet were just showing us that there was a problem somewhere else.
So then we've got one of our latest editions. Again, kind of looking at this idea of like thoroughbreds having long toes, low heels, and this worry or concern of I don't, can I use the word strain? Like strain on the back legs. We both like weirdly enough, when we both saw this horse independently, we messaged each other. And Phil was being very polite and very professional, and we both kind of basically said, I said, "Oh, I reckon it might be on the way to having suspensory issues." And Phil's like, "Well, I wasn't going to say anything, but now you've mentioned it." So yeah, this is one of the latest editions. And Phil, I don't know whether you want to talk about him before I show the before. Well, this is before, and I can show the after.
So yeah, again, as soon as he arrived, I think he pulled the shoe off, which
Yeah,
is
it is.
just standard at our yard. But yeah, so he was shod. He was shod with nice, big, wide shoes, which is great. It's great to see people shoeing thoroughbreds with big, wide shoes. The shoeing itself was, it was good shoeing. It's a bit long in the toe behind. I think the middle two picture, the
Uh,
second picture.
yeah.
So yeah, so you can see he's sort of got a bull nose, we call it, where the toe of the foot looks as though it's slightly rounded. It's not quite in a straight line, which indicates that there's possibly reverse rotation. So there's the back of the pedal bone is quite low, and there's no prolapsing of the foot, which is where the frog starts to fall through to the shoe. So we knew there was. It was say it wasn't going to take much to fix it, but we know there's probably some reverse rotation. So it's a case of dressing the foot accordingly, trying to remove as much toe as we can, leave as much heel as we can. And yeah, so this is the job straight after. Again, if you look at those, the hind feet are on the right, front feet on the left. And if we look at those hind feet, they haven't got that bull nose structure anymore. But on the one on the furthest on the right, if you look at the very top, you can see where I finished my rasping just underneath a growth ring. And the reason I done that is because we can monitor how the foot's growing from then on. So I can keep an eye on that growth ring, and I can see to make sure that as the foot grows, it's going down in the direction that I want it. Well, in the way the foot wants to grow, and I'm not allowing it to go too far forwards and start to pull itself away. But you can see the bull nose is nearly sorted. It's looking really good. Still on the third picture, you can still see there's a slight bull nose at the top, so it's still not quite flat at the top, which tells you that there possibly still is a bit of reverse rotation. Because these things just take a long time to fix. But we just shot it up with I actually took the big flat shoes off and just put a concave shoe on because this horse is not going to be doing too much bar walking. So he doesn't need to be pushing off from behind on a surface. So therefore, he can get away with just a very grippy shoe, which meant that I could put a slightly thinner shoe on and set the shoe back a little bit more.
So
And
the
then,
biggest question, oh, sorry, Karen, I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt you.
carry on.
I was gonna say the biggest question we always have with thoroughbreds is, do I shoe all of my thoroughbreds? And we have the full range of shoeing at ours from nothing, so barefoot all the way through. It's by horse basis. So there is obviously people are like, well, I want to take my horse barefoot. What transition period is there? Do you shoe or do you not shoe? And Phil and I, if they come straight out of training, the ideal is that we could take the shoes off and turn the horses out in the field and let them have their down period. Some horses will not do that, and some horses will not cope with that. Other horses will. And it's like with some, we might take the shoes off, turn them away, and when they come back into work, they might need shoes to help them. Some are fine without. Phil, do you want to talk about Bailey Bops?
Yeah. So for every extreme, there's another extreme to that. So Bailey is the extreme to the rule. So we like to take the shoes off. So Bailey arrived and took all of his own shoes off, and then we like to give them time without shoes on. Um, Try and bring them back into work, and we see how they go. We've got quite a stony surface um, towards the school, and then any hacking we have to hack out over. It's not too bad. It's just slightly stony. So a lot of horses, except for my daughter's cob, need shoes just to help them get over there. But Bailey didn't. He seemed absolutely fine. So we knew then that he'll be able to walk down the field comfortably. He'll be able to spend his time out, and we could leave his feet to recover and just breathe and just expand again because these horses are still maturing. So they're not fully grown when they come out of racing. So the foot has to flex and expand. So the first lot of pictures was, I think that was before I even saw Bailey. I think he just arrived because when I got to Bailey, like I said, there was no shoes left on there. They'd all come off. And then Lou said to me, "What do we do?" And I picked it up. There was no foot on the bottom. As you can see, the cracks in the wall. I couldn't even put a rasp on the hoof wall without bringing pressure onto the sole. So I said to Lou, just give him a couple of days. We'll see how he goes, and then we'll have to knock a pair of front shoes on. So I think the next slide is of Bailey. I don't know how long after he arrived,
That's
but
winter time, so that's probably about 5 later.
so
So
this
because
is, yeah. So and at this point, I still hadn't trimmed Bailey's feet because they had sort of self-trimmed and they were perfect, and he was still coping, walking on the concrete, walking up and down from the field, and doing the schooling. He's can gallop across the field and he's comfortable enough. So we decided to leave him without shoes on. And then this possibly is just outside the winter time, is it?
yeah,
So
like I don't know. I should have like in hindsight, I should have like cleaned those feet up, but I was so impressed by his feet. I was like, I need to take these photos. I need to send them
so
to Phil.
these again, I still hadn't ever trimmed them. So Lou sends me these photos saying, "Do you think he needs a trim?" And I was like, "I don't think he does." And I was thinking, "Oh, it's not going to pay my mortgage." So again, we just left him because everything was looking good. The hoof pass and axis is good. The heel looks good. The toes look good. They're not cracking up, not falling apart. There's no cracks. So the feet themselves just look really strong. So we decided the best way to do this is just to allow Bailey to let us know when he needs trimming. And Bailey's been at our yard now for, Lou's yard, keep saying our yard, Lou's yard for 3 years.
Yes. 3 years.
And yeah, Bailey still hasn't let us know that he needs his feet trimming. So Bailey has never had his feet trimmed once since he arrived, but his feet just naturally wear, and they're just perfect. And they are the best, probably the best feet on our yard, because we don't have to manipulate them. We don't have to change the balance. We don't have to do anything to them. He just self-regulates, which I think a lot of people get hooked on the fact that farriers just want to put shoes on all the time. But with a business head on, I make more money out of trimming horses because I could do that on the back of a moped. I wouldn't need a big van and gas. So I would actually earn a lot more money if I just sort of rolled around on a moped trimming horses. But for Bailey, he's the only horse ever that I've met that I've never had to trim his feet. And the only bonus about that is the fact that obviously I'm a livery at the yard, so I see Bailey a lot. So we can monitor him all the time. We never neglect him. We never leave him to go over. He's stabled right next to my daughter's pony. He's always got his head over wanting treats and a scratch. So always looking over the door at his feet, just thinking, please just grow something. So, and I know the day that my daughter starts to ride him, I'll end up having to do something. So, and then, as I said, the extremes. So this is Bad Feet Bob, and he is the other extreme to Bailey. So poor Bad Feet Bob. I don't know if you want to. Do you know the start of the story first, Lou?
So Bad Feet Bob, I got approached by the vets. So Bad Feet Bob had been in and out the vets with lameness issues, which when you see these feet is not really a surprise. I knew Bad Feet Bob because the owner had approached me wanting lessons, but they constantly kept cancelling because the horse kept going lame. They were also struggling with feeding them. They were spending £100 a week on hard feed between two horses. Neither looked amazing, and we were in the summer at this point. They were both quite ribby and quite poor in their coat. So one, I think like Monday afternoon, the vet phoned me and said, look, this horse, we can't get it sound. And I've told the owners that he's either got to come to you and I need you and Phil to sort this out, or we have putting this horse to sleep. So Bad Feet Bob left the vets, came straight to mine. Phil then literally turned up because Phil is a savior. And this horse had been shod 2 weeks prior to this. And it turned out to be a case of the farrier was struggling with confidence to be able to shoe these horses. Also, the environment to which where they were being shod was quite difficult. And it was also a nutrition issue as well, because they were being on, I think they were kept on like an acre between two of them, and they were on that acre for the entire year. So it was again, a whole situation. Um, and
So
yeah, do you want to go with
yeah.
it? Oh, go with it. Go.
Well, I was going to say. So the thing is, so the previous farrier is actually a good friend of mine, which made it more awkward. But after speaking to him, I think if this horse had turned up, I would have just automatically thought, oh, that was a bad farrier. But to be fair, he's a very good farrier, and he has got more confidence with shoeing the thoroughbreds and stuff now. But when Lou says it wasn't ideal, he was shoeing this horse in the dark in the middle of winter with no electricity in a stable. So, and they expect miracles from a situation that was just so wrong. And then when they wanted us to fix it, and we told her she had to be at our yard during the day, during daylight, and the horse had to come 40 minutes to us for me to shoe it, she dropped everything and did it. So it's easy to say, he did a bad job, but she didn't make it easy at all for him. So it's, a lot of the time as well, this isn't just through bad shoeing. This is just a whole set of bad circumstances as well.
Um, so these are the x-rays of this horse of that. So the third image along is probably the worst, I think, either Phil and I have ever seen of a foot ever, quite frankly, like bad. And that foot there on presentation in terms of image is the x-ray in the middle. So Phil and I were chatting earlier about like just because a foot looks away doesn't mean that it x-rays the same way. It's right up there with, you ride the horse, not the x-rays. Um, so that was where we first started off. I didn't touch this foot. I didn't do it. Phil did. And then the image on the right is him 5 weeks later. Yeah, 5 weeks later, wasn't it? Before you showed him,
Yeah.
because you X-ray before shoeing. and those were both his front feet. But I just wanted to kind of flip between these. But so these were the feet 4 or 5 minutes later from these images here.
So the
And
second image in would be the third image in from the other one,
yeah, like should ignore my
just to make it confusing.
yeah, soz. But yeah, so like what did you do with Bob to help him out?
So with Bob, Bob came with again with he had heart bars on behind, and then the shoe. If Lou goes back an image, and everybody looks at the third image along, that everybody thinks is horrendous, or this foot here, that's perfect. So we look at that. It doesn't look like there's a shoe on there, but there actually is a shoe on there, and it had a what we like to call a half heart bar. So the outside, or a Z bar shoe. So the outside of the shoe from the quarter back is missing to take strain off the heel, because the heel had prolapsed and it ruptured. So there's a big crack in the heel. So he's trying to take all the strain off that heel and then transfer it onto the frog to give it time to relax and try and fix itself. So there is actually a shoe on that. So that was the worst foot, I think. Shocking foot. And then, like I say, all the other feet had heart bars on. So looking at it from having the X-rays, looking at its confirmation, we watched him walk up, which was not a very nice sight to see. We decided that, and also having the backing of the vet made it a lot easier. So we knew that we could push the boundaries, and it's awful, but knowing that there was only other one option for this horse meant that we could just pretty much throw everything at it and hope that something sticks. So to start with, we took his shoes off, we trimmed his feet. So, and from the X-rays, you can see very little sole. So what we've done was we just rubbed the rasp around the toe of the foot. We had to level the heels because, as you can see from the picture of the foot there, that the heels were just they were folding under, so they were rolling forwards. So they were completely pointless. So we did have to trim more off the heel, which seems counterproductive, because obviously all we want to see is more heel. So we removed all the heel, we removed a tiny bit of toe, we dorsal wall dressed the foot. So we tried to get that big old flare off that toe. There wasn't much to come off the sides, just to try and realign the balance of the foot. And then we applied a 3-degree graduated mesh pad and some dental impression material. So the one on the left of this picture. So the other one is called a spider plate bar, which sort of puts more pressure towards the center of the foot. Whereas you can see with the 3-degree pad and dental impression material, it basically, dental impression materials like the sole of the trainer. So it's really nice and soft. And if we put that all at the back of the foot, and we make that a really nice, comfortable position for the horse to stand in, the horse will then stand more upright, and then it will spread the weight of the foot across evenly, 50-50 to the front and the back. And
With Phil, sorry, don't mean to interrupt. With a foot like that, why would you still nail into it? Would you not like? Why would you avoid like so? Get like why would people possibly use glue on shoes, and give me the pros and cons of glue on shoes with that? Like, because again, that to me, I'm not a farrier, but I would be like, I wouldn't want to nail into that foot. I know I'm not a farrier. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate right now. But glue on shoes, why? Give me pros and
so,
cons of glue on shoes.
so glue on shoes are great. I've used glue on shoes in the past. All the new sort of synthetic shoes you get, clogs and stuff, they're all glue on, but I mainly use them on ponies for laminitis or just uncomfortable ponies, just because they're easier to attach to the shoe, especially on naughty little ponies. It's very hard to nail a shoe on while it's jumping around all over the place. Thoroughbreds themselves, the only time I use a glue on shoe is normally when the foot is disintegrated and I do not have anything left to nail into, or if I put a shoe on, the shoe would be overhanging the foot because there's not enough wall there to cover the sides of the shoe, which means that the horse would just stand sideways and pull them off. So, and I would just use an acrylic glue and just glue an aluminium shoe on.
Because we did have one that I took to the States that had the most horrific feet, and you did glue on shoes, and you're like, when he gets on that plane, I don't want him to come back because Ryan, you can't on, you don't
Yeah.
know.
So yeah, I think the thing is though as well. Personally, I'm probably the tightest person on the planet, so I do find it quite astronomical how much it costs to glue on a shoe. So unless it's an absolute necessity, I try to stay away from it. So with Ryan, I think if I remember rightly, we built his foot up with glue, but I still used nails to hold the shoe in place. So we did a bit of both. So we, I think I tacked the heel nails in, and then I used the glue to build his foot back up, and then I just nailed through the glue. Um, just purely, I think every farrier has their own opinion on how they feel about glue on shoes. And like I say, I've used them. I've had a thoroughbred before with a pair of glue on shoes for 10 weeks, just so it could just grow some foot. It had no foot on it at all. So we glued a pair of shoes on it and we just left them on there until the foot started to look long. But that foot looked perfect. There was no issues with balance. It was just it had no foot at all. There's nothing to nail into. So glue on shoes would be my last resort, really. And the cons of gluing on shoes, just financial. I think it's just a financial. It is very expensive. It's very expensive for me to buy all the stuff, let alone for me to charge somebody for my time to put it on as well, because it's quite time consuming, especially this time of year in the winter, coming into spring. All the glues that we use are they're very slow in the winter to set. So there's a lot of trying to get the horse to hold its foot up for long enough while the glue sets. If the horse puts its foot down too soon, the shoe will move. Once the shoe's moved, you then have to replace all of it. You have to replace a new shoe, because once that glue starts to set onto it, it will not come back off. So it just becomes a bit of a nightmare, especially if you've got a frisky horse or a horse that won't stand still. So therefore, you need the vet to come out and sedate it. So yeah, it can just become astronomical in price, but also it's time. It takes a long time, and I tend to find that the least amount of time I can spend messing around with the horse's legs, the more likely they are to stand still for me.
Found out with Bob, I think Bob once he had really good we have very good grass, which is great for our thoroughbreds, not so great for our EMS laminitic prone ponies. But I think it was a mixture of the shoeing, having access to we got his feed right down. He was living off grass and good dengy feed and balancer. His shine came back to his coat. He came sound within 5 days, I think, which was amazing. Um, yeah, I thought Bob was a good
Yeah,
one.
Bob was unbelievable. But when you say came sound, I think he was so lame that any improvement after 5 days would have looked so much better anyway.
Yeah, yeah, he just didn't look like it just didn't look awful to ask him to walk. I think that was probably, probably the best way to put it. Um, and then I'm just conscious also of time, so Corny was the same again, longer toes, wasn't he? He was the same kind of crack walls, but that was again within a shoeing of that wasn't much. That was just a kind of rebalancing foot, if I'm
Yeah,
correct. Just a kind of, yeah. And then this chestnut person here, again, he's almost a bit like the new recruit here, isn't he? Kind of that
yeah, that long
longer
toe,
toe. And
flat heel.
those are
So that I turned up to help this person out, and as soon as I saw the horse, I asked if she'd ever contemplated having X-rays of the feet. So luckily, she contacted the vet. So I was only there to sort of put a shoe back on, and contacted the vet, and then the vet phoned me and said, "Could you go back and have another look?" And as you can see here, how long those front toes are. So I think this was about 5 weeks after shoeing. So I went back the following week and reshot it. So again, it's all about just rebalancing foot. And the only thing is, unfortunately, I didn't get a good enough photo, but you can see from those hind feet, they're the feet were so prolapsed that frogs were touching the floor with the shoe on. So all that digital cushion, everything had fallen out the bottom of its foot. So those hind feet were unbelievably flat. And I could tell from the moment I picked the foot up, there was going to be quite a bad issue. So I spoke to the vet, we came up with a plan, and our first thing was we were just going to try and rebalance the foot as quickly as possible. just to try and get the horse to stand up properly. Because once you get to a point in which the frog's prolapsing, that horse is never going to want to stand back up because it can't push its own frog back in. And the only way to do it would be to take the shoes off or to apply a pad. So again, 3-degree pad, no dental impression material under this one, purely because there's such a big gap where the frog is that if I put any in, it would all just squeeze out and it can be completely pointless. So hopefully next time we'll be able to put some in. But again, so you can see the pastern angle of those hind feet just looks so much better just with that 3 degrees, which is such a small amount that it's pushed the back of that foot back up, which has just sorted the pastern out. So if you raise the heels, the fetlock drops to compensate, and that happens on every horse. So as you can see, that access looks slightly more elongated than before, but it's okay because it all looks in a straight line, which is what you want. You want that hoof pastern access to be as straight as possible. So without an X-ray, you can see that I believe they've already improved. But if you took an X-ray, I'd imagine that the inside the foot wouldn't have improved straight away. But we've just got the balance back in the limb itself rather than worrying too much about the hoof. And then the same with the fronts. We just took off as much toe as we could and set the shoe back just so it's got a bit more, a quicker break over. And from all accounts, that horse is looking much better, working better behind. I think the first thing they said to me, it doesn't push from behind. And I saw those feet and thought, well, I wouldn't want to push from behind if I was in pain.
Valid. Which then leads us on to the next stage. So we always talk about the early stages of retraining and their foot quality, but we found also that once they get to a certain level, and especially with what I do of dressage and the horse is sitting behind, pushing more, taking more weight on the hind leg, we then have to adapt the shoeing again. Like we're always talking and we're always doing things, and I know I am the bane of your life across a WhatsApp message, but it's kind of like it's also the later stages. It's not like once the foot is sorted, that's it. I think if we're moving these horses forward in whatever direction, we always have to be aware when we're asking the horse's body to do something. If you think back to those original confirmation photos, against maybe their natural grain of what they're meant to be doing. So just quickly, it's kind of like if we consider the transfer of energy and we're asking these horses to potentially start working uphill and be pushing and going, we're working the muscles in a different way, developing muscles, making what was maybe stronger, less strong, and what was weak, stronger. Again, developing this posture the whole way through. So this horse here, this is him, the same horse stood up from the beginning. Um, and this is like his canter's always been his strongest, but also his weakest pace because he's got a very big canter, but he can't balance himself. He's always been quite strong and thrown himself forward onto his shoulders. But his development of himself as he's gone through the years, he is very croup high, like very, very, very croup high. My trainer, when I first got him, said, "Oh, well done, you've got a horse that's more croup high than your previous. Congratulations. What were you thinking?" But he's turned out to be a phenomenal horse, and I love him, and I think he's one of Phil's favorites. I think. I don't know. And I Bailey's like ultimate. I think Greg's next on the list.
Craig's like a big Labrador.
He's great. He was swinging stuff around the other day when Phil was showing him because he got bored. But the thing with Greg that we realized, or I realized, is that what was happening was that by him sitting and actually taking his croup lower than that of his wither, which he isn't naturally built to do, was that we were looking at these long pasterns and sinking into the sand, and his fetlocks almost touching the floor, which was just asking for a hind suspensory snapperoo. Phil, do you want to talk any more about this? What's to talk about this?
So yes, I think people get stuck on the fact that farriers want to shoe horses just to put shoes on, but a lot of it's to do with support. So Greg, who sends me this photo in a WhatsApp, and then she sends me the photo with the arrows on it, saying, "What can we do?" And I was like, "Okay, leave it with me." So he just had.
I mean Phil. I mean Phil, not me.
So he just had normal concave shoes on, which are built for grip more than anything else. So as he's working on a surface, we knew all we had to do. I just had to add more support. So a flatter shoe, a little bit bigger, a bit more length, a lot thicker toe to try and stop that toe from digging into the surface. So we altered the shoeing just for support. So we didn't have to alter it because of any lameness or anything. We just altered the support, and then bingo, I did it.
That was 3 weeks later. So it was one shoeing, and this is entirely actually a bit more in balance, to be fair. For my riding, that's less in balance, that's more in balance. Um, but he already has more distance between his hind fetlock and the floor. And he felt better to ride and he felt better through the rain and more balanced, which might sound mad, but it really did make make the biggest difference. And obviously we want these horses sound for the longevity and happy and comfortable. And it's not thoroughbreds that this happened. The only reason that I am aware of this is because of one of my warm bloods, Kevin, who has hypermobility behind, and in that middle image, his fetlock is actually on the floor. And he wasn't shod behind. And I remember sending these photos to Phil, going, "I'm gonna break my horse, help." So, Kevin got some fancy sneakers. He got some very fancy sneakers.
So yeah,
Yeah,
with Kevin, we made them out of aluminium because we tried to make them out of steel, but because of adding all that extra weight, he didn't like it, did he? Because he went from having no shoes on to these ridiculously heavy ones. So we had to figure out another way of doing it. So I had to unfortunately hand make them out of aluminium just to make them as light as possible. But again, there you can see straight away those fetlocks just aren't digging in. You know, the fetlock is doing its job. That's what it's supposed to do. But when you get this hyperflexion motion, that's when you know it's going too far down. And I think, you know, working as a home team and everything else, but I love it. I love when Lou buys the pictures and then she sends me photos. And then sometimes it's a case of guess what's wrong with this one. Or, you know, she sends me videos of horses trotting up. And then also, yeah, quickly, we with the thoroughbreds and everybody moans about them being hard to shoe or they're naughty. So this is William. William about a year and a half ago decided all of a sudden, or no, it's about a year ago, all of a sudden he didn't like me shoeing his hind feet. So he became an absolute nightmare to do. So we took our time, we worked it out, and he does not like taking his foot forwards underneath for me to clench it up, especially if I put myself between him and his belly and then I pull it out, or if I lift it any higher than about halfway up my shin, which obviously being a farrier, I want it on my knee. So we figured out that if I lower my foot stand to its lowest possible setting, I don't pull myself in between him and the leg. I do it all from outside, which isn't the easiest thing to do, but he's so much happier, so much more comfortable, and he hasn't tried to throw me into a wall. And I think, you know, I think all the horses in the yard as well, we have a shoeing area, but we don't shoe them all in that area. So certain horses I'll move around the yard so they can stand next to their friends and stuff as well. It's about making them comfortable, not just in their like in their stance, but making them comfortable in their environment as well, I think.
so they're nice and relaxed. Very quickly, overreach boots to try and keep all the shoes on. These are just some images I took of a variety of overreach boots with Phoebes on. Of like when people put overreach boots on, they think they're doing the right thing by putting overreach boots on, but it's what type of overreach boot you put on and how it lands over the foot. Overreach boots will not stop your horse pulling shoes, but it will help prevent them striking into themselves and pulling the shoe off without it there. But it's the type of overreach boot you have on them and how it sits on the foot as to how it's most effective. So you can see from all of the images here, apart from the last one on the right, that they won't fit or they won't stay or they won't prevent to some degree. Any other words on that, Phil?
Yeah, just ideally when you're putting an overreach boot on, you know, people think that they're just there to cover the bulbs of the heel, but they're there to try and prevent the overreach from the hind leg. For horses in full canter going across the field, that overreach boot is not going to fall from the fetlock back down to its foot in time to save the shoe, but there's a chance it might. So they're not perfect, but they do help. And fitting them properly, as you can see, a lot of those boots do not fit at all. In my mind, I'd say the bottom row, second one in, perfect. It's touching the floor. It's pretty much pucker with the fetlock. So yeah, it's a bit big, but hopefully you won't get too much movement in it. But the one on the right hand side is pretty perfect. It's going right down to the floor. It's quite tight at the top, so you're not going to get too much movement in it. But a lot of them there, if you can see the shoe at the back, then that overreach boot isn't doing its job.
Think so. The last few slides are about different types of shoes, but I think we've covered quite a lot, if that's kind of fair. Um, Again, if anyone hasn't scanned this QR code and they'd like to, for Agria to go and do like look into what Agria do and can offer, please do scan it. This will come back. You'll also get this on the playback. So if you haven't scanned it now and you are doing something else, like eating your dinner, um, it will be available on your playback. So I know we have a load of questions. So I've got one. First off, Phil, which I asked you about. Um, Someone asked, is there an age at which it would be more detrimental to try and use corrective shoeing or trimming on a horse? Does this affect like their way of going? If they've gone a certain way for however many years, is it going to be difficult for the horse to adapt to their new feet?
Any sort of corrective shoeing needs to be done in line with a vet. So you want to discuss it. And normally, I only ever go with corrective shoeing if there's a lameness issue. You never really do corrective shoeing unless there's something very obvious. So as the horse gets older, we had one on our yard, warm blood, and she had a very upright, well, Meridian as well, had one very upright foot and one very flat foot. And we just shod them as two separate feet. We never tried any remedial shoeing, and that horse stayed sound and carried on right into his retirement. And yeah, so in my mind, if you're going to try remedial shoeing, there's got to be a reason why you end up attempting it. And if you go in just trying to adjust things, you normally tend to find that you'll discover other things that you don't want to know about. So it's just, as long as your horse is working sound, there's no point in fiddling around.
Robin, oh, Ali's back. Any Robin questions from chat? Hi, Ali. Ali's back.
So the first question is, a lot of owners have front shoes only and it seems to work. How do I know when doing too much like that, since soreness might not be as obvious?
The only reason you put shoes on is for depending on the job. So, like obviously, we've shown you with loose horses, we've had to put hind shoes on just for support because there's an issue with them working on a surface. If you're just happy hacking your horse, or you're just doing soft work on a surface, and there's none of those issues, and your horse is going sound, you don't need to put shoes on. I don't believe you have to put shoes on because you feel like you need to. My daughter's pony doesn't have any shoes on, and it's sound as a pound. So there's no point in putting shoes on it.
Just for context, Moby is, I've had him a year now and he's what, 18 hands and the rest. I've got the best photo ever of Phil stood next to Moby and like the height difference is hilarious. But anyway, and Moby is only shod in front, but he's a big horse and he's a big moving horse. And I'm very concerned about asking too much of him being the size that he is. And I said to Phil, was it just after Christmas? I was like, Phil,
Yeah.
do we need to put hind shoes on Moby? And Phil looked at me and went, Lou, does Moby need hind shoes on? Do I have to? And I was like, well, does he? And Phil was like, you will tell me if he's struggling or is he finding stuff difficult? And I was like, well, no, but I want to try and be a step ahead. And Phil's like, his feet are good, the quality's good, he's not struggling in his work. So are we just putting them on to make yourself feel better? Like you're doing something? And I was like, oh, okay, fine. It's really difficult. It is difficult. I have those panics all the time. All the time. All the time.
Nicola has asked, this was to do with the very early slides about talking about from foals and pre-training. Has this over time been bred into them, or is it only when they're starting training? It's to do with balance and how they land on their feet.
It's just, I think it's just been, sounds awful, but I believe it's been bred into them. I think it's with the thoroughbred aren't natural animals, are they? They're something that we created 100 years ago to go really fast in a straight line. And a lot of the issues we see is just it's bad breeding from the beginning. Obviously not anymore because the breeding practices are brilliant now. There's no interbreeding like there used to be. But thoroughbreds are weird because when they're born, like I say, you try and keep those heels down, don't want the toe. Sort of, you get ballerina syndrome. The tendons start to contract if you allow those heels to go too high, which sounds counterproductive because the rest of the time we're trying to get heel back on them. But it's just the way that they're built. So the foot mimics the shape of the pedal bone. So it doesn't matter what happens, once that people bone's fully grown and it's expanded, that foot's going to match it on the outside. So it is a bred in thing, the feet. It's not something that has been done through the way that they move. It's just the way that they produce their own foot.
Thank you. And I think you covered the next question a bit when you talked about Bailey. Why are racehorses typically not recommended to be barefoot, despite some research suggesting that barefoot horses typically have improved foot health?
Yeah, so but we don't shoe feet for feet. We don't do it for foot health. We do it for comfortable for the horse, for its comfort, to make it more comfortable. So no, like I said, nobody wants to put shoes on like Bailey. Not in a million years would I want to put shoes on Bailey, because his feet look brilliant, and I know if I start shoeing them, I'm going to make them weaker. So it's a case of we shoe thoroughbreds, because if they're struggling, like I say, lots of stones round by us, and if they're struggling, we pop a pair of shoes on. It's all to do with just making them comfortable. It's adding support rather than doing it because we feel like we should do.
And like Will's, for example, we wanted to take, so William, in the first year out of racing, he kept blowing abscesses out of his feet, and he didn't go lame ever with any of his abscesses. It was really, really odd. And in one day, he blew two separate abscesses out of one foot, didn't even get puffy, wasn't lame. And I sent Phil photos every time. I was like, what's going on? And in an ideal world, Phil's like, we would take these shoes off and let him have a bit of downtime. But if we took any of his shoes off, he was crippled. He couldn't do it and he couldn't cope. So it was a case of like, actually, it's going to be more detriment to his overall health and being able to move across the field and be comfortable, to take his shoes off for the sake of doing a process of like the ideal and the gold standard of what we would like to do. But he couldn't cope without his shoes on. Like, he just couldn't. Like, it was just, it's a horse by horse basis, really, I think.
Yeah. Alana has asked, how often is poor feet left to fester before it becomes a visible problem? Do you often feel like it's accumulative over time?
I think sometimes it can be. I think if things are left unchecked, it can accumulate into a bad thing. But I think the majority of farriers, it's not something that accumulates over time. It's normally something that just happens, especially like with conditions like corns. Long feet, it's really sounds awful, but it's a lot 50-50 with the farrier and the owner. You have to be able to look at the feet and think, oh, they're getting a bit longer, they're getting longer, they get put more strain on those on the heels. The farrier can do what the farrier can do, and then I think the more you discuss it with your farrier, like with all your home team, you bet you discuss things with them, the more you can learn about it, and you can see it from their point of view as well. So I don't think it's accumulative unless it is just through neglect.
Do you find it difficult, Phil, to have conversations of shortening shoeing cycles? So for some horses, it might be that they need to go on a 4 week shoeing cycle for a little bit, or some have to go from a 6 week to a 5 week for a few cycles to get on top of something. Like, do you find those conversations easy or well received?
I think it's all particular. It just depends on the owner. I think again, at the moment we're going through a financial crisis, and I think when you try and tell somebody that you want to drop their shoeing from, they want to go 8 weeks and you want to do 4, so they know they're going to pay for your shoeing twice as much through the year. It's quite a financial burden. So yeah, it is quite hard. But unfortunately, I'm at the stage in my career now where if I say to somebody, I feel like we should be doing 4 weeks, and they say, no, I want to go 8, and then I just sort of step back and say, okay, well, going forward, you need to get somebody else, because I know ultimately, if anything goes wrong, I'll get the blame. And it's that thing about the feet getting bad over time. When you can't control them and you can't keep the toes back, it just becomes impossible, especially if you're working against the owner as well that wants them to go 6-7 weeks, and you're permanently trying to keep those toes back. It's just impossible to do.
It is, like, we've experienced it in the last few weeks. We both know of someone that is struggling financially, and their horse is very, 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 very weak through its top line. It's just like out of racing. And they are struggling financially, and they have changed the way in which they want to manage the horse. So they want the horse now to go and live out, which we're going into the summer, the horse should be fine. Now the rules are within where it's going, the hind shoes have to come off. But unbeknown to myself and unbeknown to Phil, all four shoes got taken off this horse. And I do have vast concerns because this horse is so weak posturally that we're taking away a lot of the support that the horse is currently requiring. And I think that could be a situation where you might get your kind of poor feet coming in because the horse is going to start compensating in other ways because he does struggle through his body at the minute. But the owner is in financial difficulty. So it's always knowing that line of how do we navigate this whilst keeping the horse's welfare at the center of it all. Like, it is quite difficult to do and to see through.
Nicola's asked, when taking on a thoroughbred, would it be useful to get a full blood work done to understand what supplements would be the best fit?
I don't think bloods
Sounds
will
like a Lou question.
Bloods won't tell you supplements. Bloods will only tell you protein levels, red and white blood cells. So it'll tell you if your horse has an infection, but it won't tell you about if your horse is lacking in something that, you might find a lack of something, but nothing to, if the horse has overall good bloods, it's the gut health, which will then help with their feet. So if you want to take bloods to know roughly where they're at with their white and red blood cells, that's about it. And maybe their inflammation rate, but unless the horse is sick, it's not going to give you that much knowledge. That comes from your dietitian and your nutritionists.
You do you test your forage, don't you? Quite regularly, which I know you've said before really helps understand what's going into the horses with helping the feet.
Yeah, so I used to go by look of forage of like, well, that looks like haylage, that looks like rich in sugar, that looks this. And it was only until we got our forage analysed that I realised that our good hay was really, really, really good to the point of one of the highest sugar contents in the country. Hay should be between, I think, like 11 to 18% sugar, like of what it came back, and ours came back at 25% sugar, or over 25. And our lammy hay, or what I labeled the lammy hay because it looked a bit brown and a bit icky, came back at 19 grams of sugar. So it wasn't actually lammy hay, and our wrapped hay, which we were feeding to the thoroughbreds, was within normal limits, but that was towards the 13, 14. So looks isn't everything, but yeah, we get our forage analysed to know exactly what we're feeding the horses, and we feed them ad lib. And actually, our horses' diet's really basic. Like, it's forage and it's chaff and it's balancer. It's nothing fancy. We don't give anything extra for their feet. If they need it, they get it, but it's the overall health of the horse. And if the horse's health is deteriorating or they're in pain, which will cause their gut health to deteriorate, then they do start losing shoes and their foot quality goes a bit marmar. Like, that's a very technical term. Marmar.
Jennifer has asked, she has horses from Hong Kong that have low heels and equate to narrow heels, and they are predisposed to thrush. I understand that there is also management practices from Hong Kong that make them predisposed to thrush in general. But could you please talk about thrush and in particular the central calculus? And is there any relation to heel conformation? And if so, what is the plan to support improvement? They are barefoot.
Yeah, so if you've got contracted heels, your frog's going to be quite squeezed in. So thrush is like a symbiotic bacteria that lives inside their feces. So when a horse stands in its own poo, it's picking up the bacteria and then it gets stuck in all the little crevices. So if you've got a narrow foot and contracted heels, that frog's going to be squashed up. I'd imagine it's really thin and it's going to trap all those little particles of feces and then that bacteria, which is anaerobic, so it thrives in dark, damp areas. So you've got this bit of poo stuck inside a hoof that's now created this lovely dark, damp area. So that thrush is going to go, this is brilliant. It's just going to go mad. It's just going to eat away as much as a frog. So, and the worst types are contracted heels where they're quite tight because all that stuff gets stuck inside them. So the way that you never pull those heels back out, you can't change the conformation of that foot really. You might be able to get them to come out a little bit, but it's more about dealing with the thrush. So my number one go-to with thrush is lime powder, because you have to get, because it's anaerobic, you have to get rid of either the damp or the dark. and you can't get rid of both of them at the same time. So what you do is you get rid of the damp, because that bacteria can't live in a dry environment. So if you use lime powder to dry the frog out, the farrier trims it back as best as he can. You dry it out with lime powder, and then that will see much improvement. But you'll never stop the thrush. It'll be a constant battle, unfortunately, with those sort of feet.
Thank you. Jennifer has also asked that you mentioned earlier that some farriers might be hesitant to trim, shoe, paw off the track thoroughbred feet as they're worried that they will go lame. Do we have to accept that correction of the feet may mean they be sore for different reasons for a period of time while they adjust, or is that not a given?
No, it's not a given. I think normally if I have to adjust the foot into the point in which I think that I'm going to create some soreness in the feet, I should never create pain. I might cause some uncomfortability. So I might make them slightly uncomfortable, especially if they come off the track and lost a lot of wool, like with Bailey. If he wasn't with Lou and I've been called out to him, I might have tried to trim the walls back a little bit and tidy them all up and make them look pretty. Because that's realistically what everybody wants to see. Knowing that I took all the wool away, I've put more pressure onto the sole, and then that making foot sore. And technically, I'm not really allowed to do that. So you don't want to. You might make them uncomfortable. Should never be making them in pain, especially any corrective stuff. It shouldn't be making them sore. It should be making them more comfortable.
Thank you. Any experience or encouragement of how long does it take to get the depth of sole from being flexi under thumbs? Recently started with spider bar composites with dim, has been barefoot from 2 to 9 years old and worn boots on front for any stony track hacks, but front feet soles were bendy and had a winter of reoccurring bruises and abscesses. Horse and I both loving the glue ons. As Phil said, my bank account not so much. And just to add, vet and farrier are happy with the supplement levels, hoping shoes give a break and allow growth. Is there any chance that we can return to barefoot in the future?
Oh yeah, I think there's always hope to return to barefoot. Dental impression material. I love dental impression material because it basically holds all that exfoliating sole in place. So it calluses the sole up more, so it creates more depth. So, but how long it takes is how long's a piece of string. It's different to every horse. It's like bruising. A horse bruises its foot, and I always get asked how long is it going to take, and I always say I don't know. It could be a couple of days to a month. You never know with these things. So every horse is different, just like we are.
Yeah, and the last question is on the chat is, do you like hoof boots? Oh, there's no.
Yeah, I like hoof boots. I think they're a great idea. The only thing is though, especially when we're discussing thoroughbreds, is hoof boots work brilliantly on symmetrical feet. So if you've got an ideal foot, because they are made an ideal shape, the same way all the shoes that I buy and I put in the back of my van are an ideal shape. But every single shoe that I put on, I have to heat up and adjust to fit the horse perfectly. So those boots only come in one shape. You cannot adjust them. So if you've got the ideal shape, so you think more of a cobby shape, not so much a warm blood shape if it's quite upright, but a cobby shaped foot, they're absolutely brilliant. And some thoroughbreds do. They've got the perfect symmetrical foot. But the moment you have any asymmetry, that boot's going to move around when you're riding them. But I always recommend to people to put hoof boots on before they try putting shoes on.
We just had a final question on the chat. Can you talk a little bit more on leaving the wool in support of the sole?
So leaving the wool in, we don't tend to dress the wool. I personally don't tend. I take the foot forwards and dress the wool before I start putting nails in. When trimming horses, I tend to, especially thoroughbreds, I tend to try and leave all the wool alone because it just supports the sole. So the weaker the wool gets, the more likely the sole's going to prolapse and become flatter. So the stronger the wool is. But then when you have flares or you have any inconsistency in the wool, you need to iron that out because again, that'll just aid in creating deformities inside the hoof. So it is important to leave the strength in the wool. You can't take too much out of it. That's why we use side clip shoes. So people see side clip shoes a lot. on thoroughbreds, and that's because we can set the shoe underneath to the ideal position without having to remove too much wall off the toe and weaken it, because then you end up with seedy toe and weak soles because there's not much holding it up. But yeah, it's a minefield how much you can and can't take off a wall.
Thank you. That's all the questions on the chat.
Thank you. Ali, do you have anything? Ali's camera just keeps like zooming in and zooming out of its own accord, and I'm really obsessed with it. I'm like,
I don't know why. Like it was just on my hair. I don't know why it was just giving you a close up of my hair. Anyway, we just had one question come through via social media, and that was to do with shoeing rules, ROR shoeing rules within showing, our showing series, specifically Tattle showing series. So I know that this is a really contentious issue, and I just wanted to address this online. So as I obviously oversee the competitions, something that I was really keen to do was understand the reasoning why we've got these rules in place. And so we surveyed the judges, the showing judges last year. And so the results of that survey, one of the questions was, what is your view on the current requirement that all horses entering ridden showing classes must be fully shod? So 57.63% of them support keeping the current requirement. So that's a large percentage of our showing judges that think that we should keep the current requirement. 22% were neutral or no view, and 20%, just over 20%, wanted to see the rule changed. The main reasons for keeping the rule, so the highest reason was actually ride judge safety. So ride judges should not be expected to ride barefoot horses, particularly on grass or hard ground, and full shoeing was viewed as a basic health and safety requirement. And they're concerned about horses slipping, basically, without shoes on. So obviously, within all the Tattersalls showing classes, the ridden classes, we do require horses to be fully shod. In hand, we do not. But also, we do have the Showing League too, where horses do not need to be fully shod. They can come partially shod, barefoot, or they can have remedial farrier. We don't allow hoof boots mainly because the final is actually on a surface at Pickering Grange at the Winter Championships. Entries are still open if you wanted to enter. So yeah, there is a ridden opportunity for horses that are barefoot within our showing series. So yeah, I just wanted to cover that now. Back over to you, Lou.
oh, I don't have anything to add. I think I was going to say the end, and like,
Oh, wait. I didn't know whether you had anything else, but that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phil. I've like begged Phil.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Phil's
thank
you.
you.
Phil was really nervous.